5 members of our society have researched some history that they know of personally. Others they have looked up. They're going to talk about 5 families in Millbury that were influential and historical. They are the Brainies, the Hills, the Horns, the Mulhanes, and the Stockwells. A question and answer period will follow, and I just ask you to please hold your questions, your comments, till all 5 are done, okay? So we can get the program moving along. So, first up will be Jeff Raymond. We'll talk about the Brainy family.
All right. So if you drive past Goretti's up Grafton Street, beyond the high tension wires, but before you cross into Grafton proper, you'll see a road on your left, Brainy Road. For a lot of people, it's just another side street on the way out of town. But for my family, like the family the road is named for, it's home. This is a house my grandparents lived in. A small house with a huge yard. It was one of the dozens of houses on this road built in the late 1960s into the 1970s on this side of Millbury. My mother lived here, my aunt and uncle lived here, and my grandmother lived there until she passed away in 2011. I spent a lot of time here at this house when I was younger, and one of my earliest memories was when I was 3 or 4 years old hiking in the woods behind this house with my grandfather. I don't remember a lot from my grandfather, who suffered a stroke when I was 5, but I do remember both my grandparents telling me about how Brainy Road used to be a farm, speaking specifically about an apple orchard not far from behind their house. Growing up in town, I knew all about the West Millbury farms, but not the farmland here. And as I learned over the years, the Brainy farmland was similarly critical to the history of this town. There doesn't appear to be a photograph of them that we could find, but the Brainy family's start in America came in 1847, when Daniel, Thomas, and Bridget Brainy of Ireland, at the time spelled B-R-E-H-E-N-Y, arrived in Boston at the height of the potato famine. William Brainy was the last Brainy to make the trip in 1850, and he and Thomas purchased land in Upton. William would marry Eliza Smith of Northridge in 1860 and purchased a small farm near the Grafton line from a man named Sullivan Newton in 1865. Sullivan Newton is one of the first residents of Millbury, and he shows up in our centennial history as one of the original taxpayers. The farm was part of a large swath of land that extended all the way to Dorothy Pond. The centennial history talks about some of that land being taken for a dam at the outlet of Dorothy, potentially over near Colton Road, and records suggest that the land ultimately purchased was bought for $1,400. William and Eliza already had a son, Daniel, at this point, and Eliza was pregnant with a second child, Robert. In total, there would be 8 children, 3 of which would pass away in infancy. William became a citizen in 1876, and by 1880, the farm had cows, oats, corn, potatoes, and what were likely the apples my grandparents talked about. Unfortunately, times were difficult. William's wife, Eliza, passed away from a stroke in 1899, and their daughter, also named Eliza, died due to complications from her 3rd pregnancy. William Brainy would ultimately pass away in 1908 at the age of 78, leaving the farm to his son, William, who would run the farm with Robert and John. John would later leave and pass away from tuberculosis in 1923. Going back to 1895, well before his death, the older William sold the farm to the younger William for $1. As many of the family members now lived on the farm, William Jr. and his wife, Joanna, purchased a home on 25 Howe Ave. The 2 of them would have 8 children living in that small house, and he worked as a contractor in the area. The house would become multi-generational with 2 grandchildren in the home, along with 5 of the 8 children and William and Joanna. One child even moved next door, building a home at 23 Howe and living there for more than a decade. Joanna passed away in 1947 and William Jr. would pass in 1948. This house is only 1,500 square feet with 14 people in it. So, good time. In terms of other Brainies of note from this family, George Francis was born to William Jr. and Joanna in 1898 and was drafted in the Army to serve with the 151st Depot Brigade in Europe during World War I. He's in the center of that photograph, the center top one. When he was discharged, he married Marion McLaughlin, and they lived at 25 Howe. Marion would pass away in 1929 due to complications from her 3rd pregnancy, and George would eventually move back to the farm with his 2 sons in 1931. Interestingly enough, George would find another woman named Marion, last name McGill, who was a Scottish immigrant from Montreal. She arrived in Montreal in 1927 and gave birth to John Brainey in 1935 during the Great Depression. George Freeland Brainey was born to George and Marion McLaughlin Brainey in 1921. He grew up on Howe Ave. He was drafted into the military in 1942 and served in the Pacific Theater. He married Marjorie Sr. in 1945, and they would eventually move to Worcester and later Oxford with their 4 children. I especially love this yearbook entry in the 1939 aftermath, where it reads, "He is a good fellow," and that George can be heard roaring in the corners of our corridors after telling one of his many jokes. His jokes, together with his fine character, will make life pleasant for him when he faces the world. I also found Georgie's yearbook profile, where his ambition was to be a farmer, his favorite song, John Brown's Body, and his favorite expression, "Oh fudge." George's brother Richard also makes an appearance in a later yearbook, described as someone who believes in hard work and does it. Richard was 2 years younger than George, but I found a lot of these when Matthew Brainey reached out to me, when he was doing his own family history project. Given that my family has such a strong connection to Brainey Road, this sent me down a research hole on my own, and Matthew and I have been sharing resources and information on and off for the last couple of years. The farm was sold in 1949 to a real estate developer, which eventually became Brainey Road. Much of it is as we know it today, although there are now 3 additional developments off Brainey Road today, including the development that has Diana Hill Drive on it, who we'll be talking about later tonight. While I don't know how many people in the neighborhood know about the farm past, I've thought about how there are more than 100 families who live on or near what was once Brainey Farm today. I believe this photo shows the current-ish location of where the farmhouse may have sat, as deed records sent by Matthew indicate a stone wall, and this was always one of the noteworthy parts in the neighborhood for me, and still is today. As for the rest of the Brainey family, while many of them stayed in the Worcester area, a family with roots in Irish immigration now has members across the country, from Maine and New Hampshire all the way out to Arizona. This is a picture from Matthew Brainey of the family, including George and Marjorie, in 1995, the bottom one. George passed away in 1999, Marjorie in 2012, at the age of 89. What's incredible, however, is that the family is still close today, with a number of them here tonight, including Matthew, who flew out here from Phoenix to visit his relatives and come to this program. While I've done a lot of research over the couple of years myself, Matthew deserved a lot of credit for this presentation. His research filled in a lot of the personal and familial gaps that books and online resources can't. And he provided many of the pictures and flavor that makes this family's history so interesting. So thank you again. And thank you all for listening tonight. Up next, we have the Horns.
So the Horn family legacy is one of years of service to Millbury and its residents. The story begins when William E. Horn moved to Millbury at the age of 25. William Edwin Horn was born in Sturbridge in 1848. He married Mary Stowe in 1871. They moved to Franklin, Mass. And then to Millbury in 1873 when he was 25 years old. His impact in Millbury was great. They had 6 children: Charles, Arthur, William D., Harry, Frank, and Walter. He was a chief engineer, or a fire chief, as is referred to now, from 1895 to 1920. And you'll see there's a lot of connections to the fire department. I tried to get other stuff to it. I wanted to be all fire department, but there's a lot of connections there. So he served a total of 25 years. A hose wagon was named after him. If you flip that. So you'll see in this picture from the Bremenville Fire Station that was built in 1893. There's a steamer and a hose wagon. So in the old days, they needed both because the steamer was pulled by horses and fueled by coal to make the pressure for the water. The hose wagon carried the hose for it. So they named it the W.E. Horn hose wagon. And I don't quite know why, because the second one was for the chief in the center, the NHC's hose wagon. So I don't know if it was a respect thing, but those were the only 2 that were ever named. So if you look at this picture, there's 14 firemen, 6 of those are Horns. So you can tell there was a lot of influence back then. The hose wagon, I described that. So he was also a selectman from 1905 to 1908. He owned Horn's store in Bremenville, which started out in a brick building on High Street and moved in 1899 to the corner of West Main Street and Burbank Street. That area was referred to Horns Corner for many years, and I'm sure some people still call it that when they talk about that area, Horns Corner. He died at the age of 88. His wife Mary was the daughter of Ithamar Stowe. So Ithamar moved from Grafton and established a Stowe farm in Millbury that's still active today. So it's interesting the connection there of the two big families, really. So the Stowes came to Massachusetts from Kent, England in 1634. A book has been published following the family's journey with this incredible detail. So thank you to Ken Stowe for loaning me this for the research, but the whole Stowe family, it's amazing the detail about what's in there. And I don't know if we have one in the museum, but maybe Kent will lend you his. It's very, very interesting. So the next slide, we're on here, is the family tree. So as you'll see from the family tree, and it's hard to read, that the Stowes and the Horns got together, and there's a lot of Stowe history, and then there's a lot of Horns, more than we could fit on this slide to do the family tree. But so William Dennison Horn was born in 1880. You can do the next slide. So the next slide, that's William Dennison Horn. So he was the son of William E. and Mary Horn. He married Cora Myron in 1903. He also had a great impact in Millbury. They had two children, Waldo and Mildred. He was also a chief engineer from 1924 until 1966, serving a total of 45 years, and that's more than any fire chief that has ever served in Millbury, and that's a long length of time. He was on the fire department for 66 years, which is a feat in itself. So they just went on and on. He died at the age of 85, 5 months after retiring from the fire department. So back then, it was you could be on the fire department until you couldn't walk anymore. And that was it. It was amazing. Now, when you turn 65, no matter how healthy you are, out the door, and you're done. So there's good and bad about it. So Bill was also a pioneer in old-time basketball, making professional sports history on 3 levels. He was a lifelong resident, a businessman, often working alongside his father, William E., at the Horn and Sons grocery store. He began his sporting career with the Millbury Litz in 1898, the first year of professional basketball. So Charles Horn was born in Millbury in 1873. So he was also a member of the fire department, and he served in the military. And you'll find that a lot with Frank. I think that was Frank's notes. Okay. Arthur Horn was born in 1875 in Millbury. He was also a member of the fire department. You'll see the connection there with a lot of them. For more than 50 years. He served in the military also. He was the fire department's fire alarm superintendent for a number of years, caring for the fire alarm boxes and the miles of wire. And I believe there was a hurricane that came through and knocked the whole system out, and I think Arthur single-handedly put everything back after that. So it's amazing what they did. So he died at the age of 79 in 1954, and he was still an active member when he passed away. So Harry Horn was born in Millbury in 1884, also a member of the fire department. Frank Horn was born in 1886 in Millbury, also a member, so all of them would have been in that picture that you have seen. And all the Horns seem to stay with the Bremenville station. You'll see, like when we talk about armies, there was a lot in the center and a lot up there, but the Horns just stayed, they all stayed together up there and pretty much ran the department. So Bill Ashton was born to William G. and Audrey Horn Ashton. So Bill's mother, Audrey, was a daughter of Frank Horn. Bill married Doris Benoit in 1955, had 2 daughters. Bill also served on the fire department, attaining the rank of chief. He died at the age of 69. Bill's grandson, Will Thompson, was also a Millbury firefighter for a time, ending a long line of dedicated relatives serving from the Horn heritage. So it went on for a long, long time. So the next slide. So the Horn brothers' horse stables were located on High Street as shown here. This picture was taken after the devastating fire to the structure in 2000. The building was demolished and a new structure built there. It originally housed the horses that would pull the steamers to the fire. The steamers could pressurize the fire hose, but the horses need to pull it. So they also had a blacksmith, a stable, and a blacksmith shop in there. So people relied on it, and people remembered the building, the old building that were around there until it was replaced. But again, it was really a hub of Bremenville, because a lot of people had horses. So when the horses were there, they had to train them to go to the steamer. Later on, the Gibsons had the horses across the street from the station, and they learned that whenever the bell rang, they would automatically go running. The fire bell went off, and they would run and get ready to be hitched up. They were just automatically trained. The next slide. So Horn Store sold a wide variety of goods. This is a corner of West Main and Burbank Street where the Village Knoll stands today. As you see in this ad from 1902, which is hard to read because it's small, they advertised provisions, boots and shoes, hay and grain, wood and crushed stone. They also list heavy teaming and specialty. So they were the cornerstone of the neighborhood because there was no general stores or anything. So they were in there. So the book, The Bremenville Girls, and I don't know if anybody ever heard of that book, but it's a good book to read. And I think the picture's on the slide too, in the next slide. It's a very interesting book about 6 close friends. One of them is Florence Horn. Who grew up in Bremenville section of Millbury. She was the daughter of Ralph Horn. In the book, they discussed the Horn family in their store. Flo's father and grandfather both worked in Horn's general store. Everyone shopped there since there was no supermarket yet in town, not even a Goretti's. Not yet. It was coming though, I knew it. So they mentioned in the book how they would get a penny's worth of candy when they went in to pay the bill. So that was worth it in itself. So this trumpet or bugle was used by William E. Horn in the late 1800s and early 1900s. We are fortunate that Tom Nault acquired it from a Horn descendant and donated it back to the Millbury Fire Department for historical display. Originals like this are hard to find these days, so thanks Tom for doing that. It was understandable that, they were used by chief engineers to broadcast orders at a fire scene. It's understandable some amplification was needed as the fire ground would get loud, especially when the coal steamers were put into service. So bugles became the sign of rank and are widely used today. The more bugles, the higher the rank. If you look at a badge or helmet, you see that 1 bugle's a lieutenant, 2 bugles a captain, up to 5 which are a chief. And you'll see there are 5 crossed in the emblem. That means that's the chief of the department. But it's an amazing piece of history, and you really won't find there's a lot of replicas around, but to find an original, and this is going to be on display in the display case at the new fire station. It's an amazing find. So Priley Pond Village, an adult community of townhouses in Bremenville off Beach Street, is built on land originally owned by the Horn family. The development pays homage to the family with the naming of Horn Way and Ashland Lane within it. So, and I'll be available for questions at the end of the show. Thank you.
Good evening. This evening I'm going to talk about the Mulhane family. I think it's obvious we can't discuss 5 generations of undertakers / funeral directors without talking about the evolution of the funeral business. This is a classic mid-19th century immigration story. Dennis Mulhane immigrates from County Kerry, Ireland in 1856 at the age of 21. I think we can assume that he left Ireland because of the Great Famine for a better life in America. His occupation was listed at the time as a bootmaker. The story begins with Dennis Mulhane, the first generation, his wife Mary Clifford, and their children, Michael William, born in 1860, Dennis Jr., 1862, who died at birth, Mary, also known as Minnie, 1866, John Joseph, 1868, the second generation, and Agnes, 1870. The Mulhane family were living on Maple Street, and he was working at St. Bridget's Church as a janitor. The Protestant undertaker would not bring the casket down the aisle, and the priest asked Dennis if he would do it. He did, and he became an undertaker, and that is the birth of the Mulhane funeral service. We got here. Okay, it's not it. The first generation Mulhane is right here. That's the only picture we have of him right there. Okay. All right, so the first picture would be the bill. Okay. All right, so we did have a bill from 1872, which is proof that the business began at that time, but they feel as though it might have been around just before that. So we're over 150 years now. The horse-drawn hearses. This first one is the original horse-drawn hearse that the funeral home had. And the second one is the horse-drawn hearse that many people have seen today. It is almost an exact replica. It is a 1872 hearse, but it's an almost replica of the original one. Okay, and I showed you the picture of Dennis. At the turn of the century, we see embalmings and formal training in embalming for undertakers. Within the family, Michael William has graduated from Millbury High and Holy Cross College and becomes a Catholic priest. He serves as pastor of St. Joseph Church in Barry from 1903 until his death at the age of 77 in 1938. I have a picture of him. I don't know if maybe you can see it afterwards, but he's a very stern-looking fellow. You wouldn't want to cross him. Okay. Mary, or Minnie, dies in 1893 at the age of 27. Agnes marries Thomas Brown and continues to live on Maple Street. It has been said that these two women sewed the interiors for the caskets. Dennis's wife, Mary Clifford Mulhane, dies in 1908, and Dennis dies in 1915 at the age of 80. The next picture, family. The next picture is of John Joseph, known as Joe. He married Catherine Roach in 1903, and they have 3 children. Mary in 1904, Angela in 1906, and Dennis in 1909, the 3rd generation. Joe Mulhane started a plumbing business on Main Street and sold religious items, according to my mother. There it is. There it is. He has taken over the business and appears in the 1907 Board of Registration in Embalming, so he was a licensed embalmer. Joe served as town treasurer for 28 years. He was director at the Millbury National Bank, was a member of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, Alhambra Council Knights of Columbus, and also the Kiwanis Club, and served as treasurer in several of these clubs. Okay, back up. Business starts to change, and the funeral service is now including calling hours and funeral services in their own business establishments. At this time, Joe buys 45 Main Street, which is the previous home of the Bucks, in 1938. There it is. And establishes the John J. Mulhane and Son funeral service. Do we have the other picture of, and there's a picture of the funeral home in 1942 after it was renovated by McGraw, contractor for Millbury, much as it is today. Dennis Mulhane, I have the next picture, yep. Attends Holy Cross and graduates from New England School of Embalming in Boston. He marries Jane Nelson Stewart and enlists in the Army, serving in Europe during World War II. During the time, their twin sons, Stuart Dennis, the 4th generation, and John Joseph are born, with Dennis Michael Jr. following in 1950. The Mulhanes were lifelong members of St. Bridget's, and Dennis was very involved in the church. Okay. So our next generation, Stuart, is here on the board. And he follows in his father's footsteps and graduates in 1965 from New England School of Embalming and New England School of Accounting, and becomes the fourth generation. He was discharged from the Army after a tour of duty in Vietnam in 1969. He becomes a full-time at the funeral home with Dennis, taking over the reins in 1978. We marry, and have two children, Matthew, Joseph, and Emily. Stewart computerized the funeral home early in the 1990s. One of the first ones to do so in the area, and went on to be very involved in our community, and is currently serving on the board of directors of the Millbury National Bank. Matthew graduated from Colby Sawyer in 2003 and embalming school. And let's see, his picture is on the board. Okay, and the final picture, which is the third generation and the fifth generation Mulhans. Thank you. Jerry Stead will speak about the Stockwells.
Okay, this happens to be the beginning of the Stockwell family. Came from Scotland, and what they did is they talked him in and they enticed him to get on a ship to come over to the colonies. So he did that, he came over, but the minute he got here, they told him, you're going to have to work as an apprentice to earn the money for your trip over here. So he did that, and then he ended up settling in Ipswich, Massachusetts, got married, and had 5 sons. And in 1720, all 5 of them came to Sutton to live. We were not Millbury then. So they came to Sutton, and they settled, and of course in those days they probably had 8 or 9 kids. So eventually Sutton had a lot of Stockwells. And I found a map of 1898, and on this map we've got Sutton here. You can see all the Stockwells that are on Sutton at that time, and we had a couple in Millbury. We were the town of Millbury by then. These are the 2 that I'm going to talk about that lived in Millbury. Some of the others are distantly related. These are in the 8th generation after John, who was one of the 5 who came. These 2 all stem from those 2, from John. Now the first one I'd like to speak about is one that I've just gotten to know because Cindy Bradway from West Millbury gave me 3 very heavy journals that were written by a member of her family many years ago. He was a farmer up in West Millbury. If you know where Stone Road is, and you follow West Main Street all the way up to Auburn, that was the property. That property was owned by Charles Augustus Stockwell, and he split it up so that half of it went to his son, Charles Hall Stockwell. Of course, I don't have a picture of him because in those days they didn't have very many cameras. But I make believe this was Charles, and he was a farmer in West Millbury his whole life. This is a real picture of his neighbor because his sister Hannah married Herbert McCracken. That's his father that road is named after, where there's all the problems now. This is Herbert. Now Herbert was married to Hannah, who was a sister to Charles. Now Charles, every day he got up, he took one of these journals, and he wrote the weather first for the day. Then he'd go on to the chores. Now, of course, anybody who knows anything about farming knows that the seasons dictate what they do every time of the year. So he talks about, in the spring, getting all those stones out of the soil so they could make the soil fine for planting things to eat, things for the animals to eat. He'd take care of all the animals. But some of the funny things, he and Herbert did everything together every day. They used equipment, they did all the chores together, and they each had a hired man who stayed at their farms and helped out with everything. In fact, one thing he'd say, he'd take a trip up to Quinsig Village and get a Swede to come back and work for him. And so they had a good time together. And Herbert did have children. He had 3 girls and a boy who often would go up to Charles' house because he lived there with his mother, and she loved having the grandchildren come up, I'm sure. And she spent a lot of time going down to visit them at the McCracken house. So they spent the time together working, and around December, they'd say, oh, we gotta get a hold of George Stowe and his band and get the harvesting of the ice. They had a big pool area or a big pond on the Stowe property. They'd have to go in there, harvest the ice, bring it up to Charles Hall Farm, Stockwell Farm, and put it into the ice house. Then they'd have to go and get all the sawdust from a sawmill, put it all over the ice to maintain it and keep it from thawing out. And they'd even keep it going till the summer. People would contact him and say, can I please buy some ice from you? So that was one job they did every single December in these journals. These journals went on from 1888 to 1900. He died in 1900, and his last entry, I think, was right before he died. What they did at nighttime, though, he and Herbert would go to the Grange, and we had granges everywhere, except Millbury didn't have one. He didn't ever mention Oxford, Auburn, you name it. They would go. They'd learn about farm things. They'd have a lot of sociability there. Sometimes they would even have meals there, and then the wives were invited too. He would often be asked to contribute potatoes or something for the meals that they'd have at the Grange. On Sundays, they would all go to the First Congregational Church. They were very active there, and they had little stalls there. So they'd roll their wagon with the horses into the stalls, and they'd go to church in the morning. Then they'd go home and have lunch, and in the afternoon they'd have to make a decision. Sometimes there were activities at the school, and they'd go there and have a show or something put on, or speakers. Or they'd go to the, this is the school. Or they'd go to the chapel, and they'd have the same thing. Sometimes they'd have meals. Sometimes they've had programs where people would put on things. They had a nice organ there, and so they could play the music and all, and enjoy being in the church for the afternoon. They also had classes for the kids, Sunday school. And the school, and next to it, I did take a picture of Cindy's grandmother is in this picture, and it was taken right outside of the West Millbury School. Now, if they needed clothing or money from a bank, they felt they had to go to Worcester to do that. So they would ride the horse and wagon down to the church, park it in one of those stalls, walk down to the St. Charles Hotel or the Horns Corner. They'd get on what was called the electric. We think of it as a trolley, but they called it the electric. And they'd go down to Millbury Center, get on the train, and go to Worcester and get what they needed. And sometimes he even spoke of taking the train to Boston and then staying in Wellesley on the way home. Where he stayed, I'm not sure. But they did get around a lot, and a lot of people would stop and visit. Now, he actually knew my relatives who lived on South Oxford Road. They would call, they called it calling on each other. Certain days they do calling. Another thing they do on certain days is the laundry. Monday was the only day they'd all get together and help each other get the laundry done. So it was kind of neat, really, to read and see what it was like to be a farmer many, many years ago. Now, the other family I'd like to share with you is the Pierce Jones Stockwell house, which was up in West Millbury. You can't see it now, but later on, if you want to look up close, I actually have them labeled there because This man and woman are in the picture. This man is in the picture. He's my grandfather. And that's all that's in the picture. And this is their 29th, 50th anniversary notice. And they lived there. And then when my grandfather, Robert, married his wife, Minnie, they were given a deed to some of the rooms in the house. And they had permission to walk through the others to get to the ones that they had a deed for until they died. And heaven forbid, would they leave the house to a woman? No, no, no. It was left to a man. So he inherited the house, and he was in charge of the poor in Millbury, mainly through the church. And he was a farmer all his life, as was his father. Then he had my father and my aunt, Lawrence Stockwell, and my aunt Edith Stockwell. Well, they got married. My father had my brother and me and my mother there. And then my aunt had 4 sons. And of this whole group, the only ones that are still alive are me and my cousin. And we get together on Memorial Day because they bring flowers for the Stockwell Stone, and we bring flowers for the Stockwell Stone, and we meet. And we have a nice visit that day. And that's right on South Oxford Road, the West Millbury Cemetery. Now, if we had our way, we could then walk up to the old homestead and see where the others were all born and how they lived. But unfortunately, there was a change to that homestead along the way because the house was sold and then rented out. And it was rented to a family called the Luzon. And Mr. Luzon had a wife and 4 small children under 6 years old. One day, Mr. Luzon was down at the Cape Cod working on carpentry work. He happened to be a member of a motorcycle group. Well, there were others in that group with him. And evidently there was a little bit of a problem because the others in the group decided to gather all of their dynamite, take it to the house, and blow the house up. And that's what they did. Fortunately, Mrs. Luzon and the kids got out of the house in time, so they were not injured. And they did catch them. In fact, your father was a sergeant at the time this was all going on, and he was in on trying to discover who had done it. And so all that was left was the chimney and one little side of the house. Yeah, they were beauts. My father did not end up being a farmer like the rest of them, although he had that gene of being active and working at all times. He got his own business as an electrician, and he actually had 8 men working for him, and of all those 8 men that worked for him, only 7 are still alive. One of them, let's see, I have that picture. Oh, I'm not going to get it out now, but the one who is still alive lives up in that property that Charles Hall Stockwell had way up on beyond Stone Road, because he also is related to that part of the Stockwell family, and his name is Donald Stockwell. And he's the only one of the 8 who worked for my dad who is still alive. So those are the 2 Stockwells that I found out more about. And if you want to look at any of the journals or anything later, feel free. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here on such a lovely evening on this at the Ace of Waters Mansion, and for 5 families. And it's an honor for me to be here tonight to represent the Hills. I have a lot of my family here in the audience, and it's not that they didn't want to speak tonight. They know the story very, very well. It's just that they're Irish, and they're just too damn cheap to go out and buy one of these shirts. Now with that said, now I got your attention finally, let's, how are we going to start this? I want you to get from the early years, get you up to 1901, and I want to finish in 1969 as quickly as I can here this evening. And so, where can I start? It was a wonderful Saturday morning. The sun was out. 1964. I'm 8 years old. I'm walking over to my Aunt Diana's house. It was Saturday morning. I had to do chores because you see, in the Hill family, my grandfather said a tired boy never got into any trouble. So there I was on my way over, thinking about watching my Saturday morning cartoons. And as I approached the back door to the big house, which it was called, the family homestead, as I approached the kitchen, I could hear Diana wailing away on the typewriter. She's pounding away on those keys like she's pounding chicken in the kitchen to make it dinner. As I walked into the dining room where she had her typewriter, always setting up, facing the door so she could see who would be approaching, and she'd be there, and her hands would be flailing away. She'd be looking down at the script that she was just reading, and all of a sudden the carriage would hit at the end with a ding, and she would take it and she'd slap it to the other side. While she's writing down these stories, I noticed that she's always looking slowly over to the left. Her eyes never leaving those pages. As the typewriter is flailing away, and the ding and the slapping, the carriage back and forth, I knew she was close to the very end of her novel, because she already had made all the corrections on it. The other big giveaway was the fact that she had 3 pieces of paper in there, with 2 pieces of carbon paper in between it. So she was making 3 copies at once, and we don't know what she was doing about that. And we're going to find out in a short second here. Can I have the first slide now? What you're going to see here right now is the 3 flags of our families, the Irish, the German, and the British. We were all dairy farmers from each country of origin. And now on the next slide, please. Now we're going to see here some of it's called The Hills of Millbury by Diana Hill. This could have been possibly what she was typing away as I entered into that dining room. And it starts off about our family. Diana wrote several books. The Hills of Millbury, part 2 of The Hills of Millbury. And Rich, this is not hose wagons. Now from the Germany part of it, that was Rosewagen. Rosewagen, Germany. Rosewagen, Germany was in the southwest part of Germany. And the Irish up there in Ireland, they were down in the southeast part, right over by the edge of Great Britain. So I've been asked by many people here, what story will I be telling this tonight? And I've got a lot of people requesting the Kelleher's, how about the Buck Village story, what about the ice cream sodas, and everything else under the sun. Because a lot of people knew Diana here in Millbury in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. So I want to start off with what's right here in front of you on this page here this evening, The Hills of Millbury, and she's talking about the Kelleher's from Ireland. This is going to be early in 1800s, and it starts off with Con Kelleher. His real name was Cornelius, but Betsy always called him Con. They had a little daughter, Mary, and you're going to find out through all these stories. You're going to see everybody's going to be named Thomas or Mary. I don't know why, but those are the only names in the world. So, yeah, you try reading on this and try to learn the exact families and keep following through it. So anyway, so they had a daughter Mary at the age of 6, and all of a sudden it's a beautiful day over in Ireland. The sun happened to be out that one day, and Con decided that he was going to go to America. So he left Betsy and his daughter there on a working farm, dairy farm, and he goes down to County Cork, because the town where they were growing up was in Macomb County, Cork. And so he made his way down to the boats, went across the pond, came to America, and ended up in Millbury, Massachusetts. So now Betsy's over there with Mary in County Cork area, and she's on the dairy farm running it. And what do you know, 2 years later, in that nice autumn time season, they went out to harvest their potato crops, those bountiful brown babies that they love to get out of the ground. They're stocking up for the winter time, and all of a sudden, they go out there, and it's mush. It's all mush with foul odors. And all they could see was going to be death. Because for the past 200 years, that's all they had depended on was those potatoes. And those all came over from Queen Elizabeth's favorite person, Sir Walter Raleigh, and he brought them over from Virginia in the 15th century. So for 200 years, the Irish had the potatoes. So now Con Kelleher is over here in Millbury, Mary is over there with her mother Betsy. For 2 years it took her to raise $15 to gain passage to come across the pond, plus railroad fees to get to Millbury. So she raises the money, she comes across the pond, she gets down to Ellis Island. With her thick Irish brogue rolling across her tongue, she tells the attendant there she wants to go to Millbury, Massachusetts. She is handed the ticket and she ends up in Middleborough, Vermont. Arriving there, she gets off the train, and on the platform there's only 2 milk cans, a small shed for 2 people to stand in if it was foul weather, and a farmer. And he was shocked. What in the world is a woman and a child doing here right now? So she told him the story. He took him into her farm. He had a nice, beautiful farm. It was a dairy farm, which he knew very much how to operate. Another thing Betsy could do was make cheese, and this is what really boosted up the sales for the farmer here up in Brattleboro, Vermont. Also, she gained her money, it took her about 6 months just to gain enough passage money to make it way back to Millbury. So when she arrived here in Millbury, she did find Con Kelleher here. They spent about a year here, and then Con decided, well, this was too much tying me down. Well, there's a program going on with the railroads right now. So him and a horde of other Irish immigrants joined to build the Continental Railroad. And along the way, of course, on the other side, the Chinese were building towards the east side of it. And that would be the last that we heard of Con Kelleher. Imagine he's buried somewhere along the railroad lines, like a lot of the Irish ended up anyways at that point. And could I have the next slide, please? So now you have Betsy and Mary here. What do you do? What do you do when now you're abandoned? You're Irish, you become a maid or a servant. So they ended up in this beautiful, beautiful brick building up on Canal Street. And across the street was the Wallings estate, a beautiful white building with all these white columns, and they owned an awful lot of property right up to the Worcester line at that time. And so right there, this is where she would meet Big Tom Hill. Big Tom Hill was 6 foot 6 inches tall. He was a stonemason, and he was also a dairy farmer, and he had his own little running farm. So Mary would marry, here we go, Mary marries Tom now. At the age, she's 16 years old, he's 22. They go out and they get themselves a little house, a little room somewhere that actually Tom actually had. And all he had in that place, which he thought was wonderfully furnished, my Aunt Diana said it was sparse. He had a double bed, a wash tub, a stove, and a kitchen table and chairs. Oh, life was good for Tom. Plus he had a new wife. So that they stayed there for a while. They ended up buying a farm up on Putnam Hill, up in Sutton. And while they were up there, they would give birth to his son, Tom. So Tom, before he was at the age of 1, they would sell the farm and they would move back to Millbury. Unfortunately, we do not know where he moved to. Those records are missing in some of Diana's writings. So now that we have Tom, Mary, and young Tom living here in Millbury, Betsy moves in with them. And one day, Betsy is driving the cows with a switch. She's walking down Riverland Street, and she noticed a sign on a big, beautiful maple tree out in front of the house. And the next slide would be the Waite House. The Waite House was built from during the American Revolution, just after it, by the Waite brothers. He was Colonel Waite. You also might know some of the history here in Millbury that Asa Waters and Mr. Burbank also were colonels in the American Revolutionary War. And this was their home. It was purchased by Buck Brothers. And this is where they put one of their relatives in there. And they had just moved in there, his wife, and he had a son, 12 years old. Now on the next slide, the 12-year-old son, their only son and child, went across the street and over there's Shop Pond. At Shop Pond, there's a waterfall. He went into the water, and somehow he went over the dam, and he had drowned, and the waterfall kept him pinned to the ground, and he passed away. The mother was so devastated. For the next several weeks and a month, she just stared out the kitchen window, looking across the street at the waterfall. The relative of the Bucks brothers family, when he would come home, lunch was unready, dinner was unready. And this went on for several weeks to where the Buck descendant family member could not take it anymore, and he thought it'd be wise to take his wife out of that house. And that's why there was a nice, beautiful for sale sign on this Yankee home, running farm, for sale. So what does Betsy do? She goes running back to find her son-in-law, Big Tom Hill, to tell him in a thick tongue, Tom Hill, there's a fine piece of Yankee property down on Riverland Street. Should you be looking into it? Well, Tom went down there, found out why the reason they were selling it, as you just heard, and they were asking $900. And they had just sold the farm up in Sutton, and the Civil War was now in full progress. He had $300 in gold coins. Now, Mr. Lincoln, as they called him back then, not President, Mr. Lincoln, he had put out an order. If anybody had gold dollars, you could turn them in for 3-to-1 ratio, in which Tom had done 2 years earlier. So he had taken his $300 of gold dollars, turned it into $900 worth of cash scrip. That's how he bought the farm with no mortgage, and they moved in there. When Betsy walked into that grand, beautiful Yankee home, she cherished every single timber and nail that they could imagine. Imagine where we were just about 20, 30 years ago, and now we're in this grand house. They would stay there, and Tom, they would have 10 children in that home. And the first one born was another Tom. And he would move on. Then another one was born was Francis, Dennis Francis Hill. And Francis only lived for a couple days and he had passed away. So there will only be 9 living in the household at this time. And Big Tom Hill, he had his wood business, cordwood, and he did the farming also. The wintertime, the cordwood was very profitable. They had all types of wood. They had the oaks, and they had the cherries and the walnuts. They all burned at a different rate. So as the children started getting older, started getting the 9, 8, 10 years old, they could have more farm hands to help process with the wood. Then later on, he would start making lumber in the back of the house. And could I have the next slide, please? The next slide. So most of the family was now already born. There was 8 children born. This is the other side of the Waite house. And you can see a well over on the property line to the far, far left, right up against the white fence. Well, the neighbors one fall, they decided they did not want to go to the outhouse all the way out in the back of the yard, so they moved it directly to the next door to the well, 4 feet away from the Hills well. So they could just walk out, so the neighbors outdoor could just walk out to the front porch and walk 3 feet into the outhouse. Well, typhoid hit the Hill family very shortly thereafter. The only antidote they had was 7 to 8 glasses of milk a day. Later on, it would take the toll on the family. They also had a daughter named Diana Hill. She would pass away at the age of 23. Tom Hill was very, very weakened, so was a lot of the other family. From that point on, Betsy got weaker and weaker. We hit the Depression of 1893. When Tom is weak, there's no more stonework to be done. Now he's working in the mills to make living. His wife is ailing. She passes away. Not quite yet. Oh, sorry, not quite yet. She has 2 more children to go. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. She's with her 9th child. Now, she disappears on them. They can't find her for weeks. A month goes by. A few more weeks later go by. They receive a letter from her looking for passage to come back from County Cork, Ireland, to come back to Millbury, Massachusetts, which the Hill family gathered up the money, sent out the funds over, and then she comes back to Millbury. She gives birth to a son along the passage across the Atlantic Ocean, a son. So when arriving back to Millbury, Mary goes up to her and says, Tom, you have a son. What do you wish him to call him? I think I'll call him Seaborn. Can I have the next slide, please? Seaborn Hill is born. They gave him a first official name of William, and today that cemetery headstone can be found quite easily over here in the St. Bridget's Cemetery. All you have to do is find the Mulhane's big Celtic cross and stop there, and go across the street, go down past the trees where this is beautiful. It's actually a tree stump. It's a carved tree stump headstone. It's gorgeous. Well, Seaborn is right across from him on the left-hand side. So if you want to go see Seaborn, take a ride down there. So that was their 9th child. And now Mary is starting to lose her memory a little bit, and they give birth to their 10th child, Charlie. And at that time, the mother is so weak, she can't take care of Charlie because of the dementia. And it's given to another Irish family that took her in. They couldn't afford to, but they did. And at that point, Mary was pretty well passed away shortly thereafter. Not soon after that, Tom Hill, struggling to take care of all of his family children, he passes away. Now with that being done, now Betsy has a lot of bills coming in here. So she looks forward to the oldest one, Tom Hill. There's a milk bill due up at the Whitney Farm up in West Millbury. So they send out Tom at the age of 13 to pay off the bill, and the rest of the family is working in the mills as much as they can. So he gets up to see Charles Whitney up there at the very top of the hill, beautiful estate, nice white columns, sort of like the Waters mansion. It's still standing today. And Charles, he took him in as a son actually, because he was there for 3 years. And by the third year there, he was running all the crops, he was planting the seasoning, he was timing all the seasons for all the crops to hang in. And at that time, Charles, known as Chi, has been working for the town of Millbury as the town clerk. That's where he started his Whitney Insurance Company while he was town clerk in the town office, and he sold insurance on the side. While Thomas was up there working the fields, Betsy, back on Riverland Street, was saying, "Oh, that Tom Hill, what a sly Yankee fox he's starting to become up there." So at the end of the third year, at the age of 16, Thomas left the farm there because there was no more work for him there, and he came back to Riverland Street and then eventually ended up over at the Wallace house. Next slide. And this is a house on Miles Street. If you were standing in Mulhane's funeral home looking up Miles Street, that's the house you would see. And that's where he would work for 3 years. That brought him up to the age of 19. Now we're up at 1901 roughly. The next slide is, that's the Walling House. The next slide is still the Walling House? No. The next slide is the Gray House. The Gray House. Now, this is where the son Tom Hill, at the age of 19, will meet Maggie Hill from Rosewagen, Germany. And she was called Maggie because she wasn't not a Mary, but her first name was Magdalene, which you could almost put Mary in front of. So, Tom and Maggie got married, and they moved over here to this first floor rental property. This is 15 South Main Street, right next to the Belfont Hotel. You notice that? And that's where he would give birth to a son, Tom. The next person in line would be Diana in 1903. And that is the Miss Hill that you know. This is the birthplace of Diana Hill. There she would grow up for many years, meeting all the passers-by, living in a beautiful downtown with a beautiful new town hall. It was like living in a city. At the age of 19, her father was doing construction work, stonework, and he started building the foundation for the Cunningham building. If you know where Timothy Sweets is, in the center of town, he did all the excavation by pick and hand, set all the stones, and set all the granite stone that you see for the brick masons to start. After that, he won another job when he was 20 years old to straighten out the Blackstone River. That's from the Millbury town line all the way down here to the armory of Asa Waters, which was actually Asa Waters III at this time, and they were doing textiles. And what I mean by straightening out the Blackstone River would come down from the Worcester line, and it would switch back. In other words, it would come like a serpentine of a snake. And what they were told to do is to take out all the switches so the water would only flow straightly down North Main Street, around St. Bridget's Cemetery, right around here by McGowan Bridge, down here to the Valley of the Forge, where all the rocks are. So they had that job going for them. Now, on the next slide, he came along, and a house came up for sale on Providence Street, 40 Providence Street, known as the Big House. Well, Tom Hill was approached by Mr. Wendell, W.W. Wendell, and Bill Wendell says, "Charlie, there is a house down here. It's owned by the electric company. Mr. Aldrich lives in it. was the first house in Millbury to have electricity. And Tom had to think about it for a little bit. It was $3,000 to buy this farm with 42 acres of land around it. Seeing that he was actually in the Millbury Fire Department, a captain, he was in charge of the hook and ladder station right inside the town hall, and we still have his buttons to his Millbury uniform. He was also the Millbury Highway Surveyor. In the center of town, it was a pretty good place. Now, the Millbury Highway Surveyor in charge of the roads, this gray house, the slide just before this, that's where he ran the Millbury Highway Department out of. People would show up with all their shovels and picks in the backyard, and he ran the highway department for 7 years. So he had that going for him. And he had some of the workers that would come in, he could just barely drag a shovel right behind him to do the work. And I'm starting to wondering, he kept them on because number one, he showed up. Possibly he could direct traffic. And I'm wondering, was this really Millbury's first pension plan to carry on people that were so elderly they couldn't work? Possibly. We don't know there. So now we can go back to the next slide again, back to the big house there. Thank you very much, Jeff. And so he did make the decision to buy the house. He didn't tell his wife Mary that they were going down there. And he made the decision that he would not spend the $3,000 that he actually had saved up, and he had it. He much would rather prefer to use the bank's money. So he took a mortgage out on the home, and he paid back the money that way. And after several years, he had paid it down far enough, and his oldest daughter, Diana Hill, had become a school teacher up here in Burbank Street. And they were paying $37.50 every 2 weeks. And Diana did not know how the town of Millbury was ever going to be able to keep paying her for every two weeks like that. She had a class of 50 students, 4th and 5th grade. And from there, she would go over to Dorothy Manor School. Next slide. On over there, she would eventually become principal. And she only had 30 students in each class at this time, but she still had the 5th and 6th grade. And over there was called Little Chicago. For some reason, I don't know why, but that was the name of that place. I do know the stories of War Hill. And another one I don't know about, where is Hell County in Millbury? We're going to have to talk about that afterwards, because I don't know where that is. But Dory Pond was called Chicago, Little Chicago. Now, the students over there were so unruly that she couldn't keep control of them, so she gave them the only way she could get them to focus in, she started a baseball team, and that way they all learned how to do the team effort, and that also helped in their education. Also along this time, Tom Hill is still got the logging business besides the construction business, and all the tree lots around Dorothy Pond that he had purchased, so he had all the standing timber. And later on, they also had all the land and timber where Carousel Drive is now, so they had plenty of wood to harvest. Now down on Providence Street, we have Diana Hill working. The oldest Tom Hill now has been overworked and started to have a little bit of a little mental breakdown. There was 9 children in this family, 6 boys and 3 girls. And when Diana was going to normal school to graduate as a teacher, she ran into 2 nice, prim and proper ladies. And this is possibly where Diana picked up her very, very correct posture and the way to act in social circles. And right there, the 2 Crompton girls, you might have known the factories in Worcester named Crompton and Knowles. It was very huge. Well, Diana was told the story that their father came in from Providence, Rhode Island. He walked all the way up the railroad tracks to Worcester, and he had the key to England. Even though he was a poor Englishman, he had in his mind, because he worked on the looms in Great Britain for so long, which was patented, and nobody could ever write drawings or take information from England, because they would not lose their looms. But he had memorized and he knew how to build them and fix them. And that's where he started his industry up here in Worcester. And Diana got to meet those 2 daughters for 3 years and at the academy, and she graduated as a teacher. I just wanted to throw that little bit in there for that part of it. Now, on the next slide that we have here, Peoples and Living's History. These, to me, out of all of Diana's stories, these are the real heroes for me. It was one of her 6th grade classes. At this time, the town did not know what to do with the Hazel Waters Mansion here in front of you. And she talked to her students, and 5 students got together. And the one second over from on the right, That gentleman, Glamos, I think his name is, G-L-O Glamos, James Glamos, he wrote a letter to the governor. That's how much he was inspired by Diana Hill. So those 5 students, taking the picture right out here on this lawn, started a large campaign collecting nickels and dimes. They had received over 200 signatures of all the students in their school, and now they were going after the taxpayers. These 5 were very, very gung-ho. Let me tell you, they just went out there. They did get the signatures. They did get the town not to tear down this building. So thank God for that. And of course, we have some of the selectmen sitting in this room that were on the board at that time, and they know the story just as well. So that was one of Diana Hill's terrific feats. And then after that, when there was a task force made up to maintain the building, there was 7 of them at least, if not 8. They wanted to save the building and continue it on, which they did. And at that point, the town wasn't giving them much money at all, but it was an undertaking, and I applaud them also. And at that time, I was building the bandstand that you see here on this property, along with 6 other carpenters. There's a brass plaque out there, and it says M. Diana Hill on it. And people ask me what the M's for. I know the fact for it, because the M stands for Mary, because Mary Diana Hill. But I always told them the M stood for Miss Hill. And they believed me. So I was happy about that. On the next slide, this is Hill Construction starting now. Let's talk about 1942. Hill Construction started. You see here one of the small dump trucks. I believe that's Albert. We'll call Alfred. We'll call him Al. Caplet. He's a Caplet. That's one of the smaller trucks. We had 2 larger trucks. 2 trucks wouldn't even fit in this tent, called Euclids. They were 6 feet tall. And some of the construction workers would take and go and put Holman and Ugg on it. Those were the names of the trucks. Someone just went out there and painted the names on the trucks. Some of the projects that Hill Construction had going on was a lot of the water correcting the Blackstone River, again down by Lemire's, called Riverside Inn. They had put all the riprap in there. They had other projects down on 140, down in Upton area, where they had to blow and straighten out the road. They had all the bulldozers on the road. They set the dynamite. They had put so much dynamite into it, when they blew it, all the dirt blew right across the road. They didn't even have to use the bulldozers. They just used a few sweeps of the broom, and they were all set there. And we had a lot of good characters on there. Medbed Rosen, he was called Peg Leg, because he had a wooden leg. We had other people like Pinky LeMay from town, Judson. And a lot of these people had Pinky LeMay, Red, Jugger, and some of the other cool names they had was Davy Crockett, who was Dave Hutnack from down the Wilkinsonville area. And we had another man named John Kennedy, was his real name. There was another guy from the Boston area named John F. Kennedy, which they started calling him John F. Kennedy, and I'm just going to finish the story here for you right now. They were working up on a project up in Ashburnham, and well, the boys went out and had a little too much to drink. So they were pulled over in the pickup truck, and there was 2 of them in the truck. The police officer asked them, "What's your name?" "I'm Davy Crockett." "What's your name?" "John F. Kennedy." "Okay, you're coming down to the house with us." So they go down to the jailhouse. They call up my father. My father goes there, picks them up, and the police officer goes, "Do you know these 2 men?" He goes, "Yeah, that's Davy Crockett. That's John F. Kennedy." And so they were released, nothing else, no charges, to just get them out of here. So I want to tell you that story about some of the Hill workers on that point there, and all the good things that my Aunt Diana has accomplished in this town. There's a lot more I could tell you, but right now it's time for Gary to start thinking to go getting some food out here. And now my last slide here that you see in front of me here. This here is a student, one of Diana's students. And while he's getting there, I'll just finish up this one story. This student named Eleanor over in Doherty Pond School. Diana had set a competition letter to have people write. And so there's Eleanor, we're writing away, and all of a sudden, she sees the boy sitting next to him, named Joe B., and Miss Hill, Eleanor's cheating. She's looking in a book. So Diana walked over there immediately. She walked over, smiled at her, picked up the book that Eleanor was reading. It's called the Webster Dictionary. Why does it say the new Webster Dictionary on both sides exactly? I don't know. Maybe if you're dyslexic, maybe that's why they did it. But Eleanor made a great point there for Diana Hill and all the other classroom members. Diana says, "Eleanor is a bright girl. When she doesn't know the word, she looks up the meaning and the correct spelling. That's something you all should start taking on." And that was a high point right there. It actually worked. So I wanted to tell you a story about Eleanor. Because here in the gift shop at the Hazel Waters Mansion back around 2012, my wife Diane was working there, Diane Hill, and this lady walked in with this book, Pages from My Life, the largest printed collection of one of a kind of one of New England's most cherished poets in the 21st century. Now I'm going to put on my new glasses. I have beautiful wire rim glasses, but I had to go back to the dollar store and buy another pair. Now I look like Buddy Holly or that baseball pitcher called Wild Thing. On the back of the book, it says, this special collection also includes pictures of the author throughout her life, plus a dedication to a childhood language teacher many people from Millbury, Massachusetts knew as Miss Hill. And I want to read you this story. It's a dedication to her. I just want to read the first paragraph because I've shown people in my family, and they said, she nailed Miss Hill right to the T. Spinster, yes, she was a tall woman with good posture, iron gray hair, which she pulled back into a loose bun at the nape of her neck. During the early days of public education, women were not allowed to teach if they were married. Miss Hill was a wonderful person. I'll never forget her. She was one that we call prim and proper, but her personality came shining through. Her blue eyes looked at you with marionette stare if you were disciplined. But those eyes could also twinkle with humor and warmth, exuded. They softened with the needs of others, especially children. She taught the fifth and sixth grade in one large room at Dorothy Manor School in Millbury, Massachusetts. Also was the principal of said school. She studied oil painting as a hobby, which we'll write about later. And it's amazing that one of her students would come back here. She was about 98 years old. I did not know who she was. My grandmother-in-law was going into the west lawn door here, and she was helping this other lady in the house. My grandmother had a walker, so here's these two elderly people going to the west lawn. I go over and help them in. I did not know it was Eleanor. So Eleanor has made quite the impression here at the Hazel Waters Mansion as one of her students. And right now, that concludes my speak with Diana Hill. I have many, many more stories to tell you. So thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening. I believe now somebody's going to take over for answers and questions. I think I'll nominate Frank Galati, President. There you go, Frank. Thank you.
Good job. While we're getting the refreshments out, any questions and comments you want to make about the speakers tonight?
Great
I
job.
think they gave you a lot of information. There's some pictures you can look at after, and we're just about ready. We'll have refreshments down there in the back.